Welcome to this week's episode of the Deliberate Leader podcast, and I'm so excited to be joined this week by Adam Christing. Adam is a professional speaker and he's the founder of an organisation called Clean Comedians. He's got an upcoming book, The Laughing Factor, and he talks about these 5 humour tactics to link, lift and lead in organisations. Adam is a fantastic keynote speaker. He's very warm and engaging and obviously very funny. So if you are looking to bring in a little bit more laughter and joy into how you lead, this is definitely one to tune into. Enjoy. Welcome to this week's episode of the Deliberate Leader podcast. And I'm so pleased to be joined by Adam Christing. Adam, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rita.
It's a great pleasure to have you here. And I know we're at opposite ends of the day. It's my morning, your evening. So I'm even more grateful for you joining us and sharing a little bit of your evening with us.
Oh, it's my privilege. I've listened to at least one of your podcasts, and I just love the intentionality of your approach to leadership. I think it's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. We do try and help people commit and recommit to leadership. If we're going to take on the gig, I feel that we should then take on the gig and do it with good intention. So I know that today I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You've got such an interesting career, particularly around bringing comedy and laughter, if you like, into workplaces, but into life in general. So I know that our listeners are going to get so much out of that because laughter, I guess, and comedy and attempts at comedy, I should say, can sometimes, I guess, misfire and be, misinterpreted, misrepresented. What brought you into this world of comedy, but particularly clean comedy, and your take on it?
Well, where I grew up in Southern California, my mom was fairly strict, but also hilariously funny. And so we were not allowed to use profanity. And we were also strongly warned not to use mean humor. And so we were always kind of pushing that envelope, pushing the boundary there. But my mom could crack us up just with her impromptu comments. And then my dad was more of a classic joke teller. He was in sales and management with an oil company. And so growing up, I had this combination of the freewheeling improv style of my mom and then the classic speaker joke telling of my dad. And then as a young man, I became a youth minister. And it turns out that's doing a lot of stand-up comedy because you're trying to teach and encourage and lead young people. And so something happened in that organization. I can't even remember what it was, but I just felt like, this is not a good fit for me. And suddenly I don't have a job. So I started this is back when people used their phone to make phone calls. Do you remember those days? So I got on the phone and started calling schools and businesses. And part of what I was telling them was, we can bring laughter to your company event or your school program, and no one will be offended. And I kept hearing people come up to me after these presentations and saying, hey, you made us laugh and we didn't have to wince. We didn't feel embarrassed. And in fact, I could bring my mom or my kids to this performance. And so we started an organization way back when called Clean Comedians. And we came up with our motto, it doesn't have to be filthy to be funny. And since that time, I've had the good fortune of giving more than 4,000 humor-based presentations as a comedian, as a keynote speaker, as a master of ceremonies. And what I've discovered is that there are certain laugh languages that people have. And so what I'm talking about in my new book is really, you don't have to be a comedian as a human being. You are innately also a humor being.
Mm. It's so fascinating to think about those kind of laugh languages. And I went and did your diagnostic. So for those that are listening, we will pop that in the show notes. You can actually do a diagnostic to work out, what's your most preferred form of humor, if you like. I got poke. So tell me a little bit more about that. What should I be aware of? And
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind talking us through the other different forms of laugh language that it might be able to people.
First read, I have to say, where you are compared to where I am, we would call it a quiz, but when you call it a diagnostic, it sounds so official and medical. I love it. It sounds more important than what I envisioned.
Yeah.
It's really just a fun way for people to, in 4 or 5 minutes, they can understand what their primary. eh, Let me put it this way: it helps you find your funny. And so, when you took the test, you discovered that your go-to language is probably poke. And so, what that means is making fun of yourself and gently teasing other people. So my guess is that you have a sharp wit. Obviously, I know you have great intelligence. And so of the five laugh languages, that one is the trickiest because it's easy to slip into sarcasm or humor that can make people feel put down. And sometimes there's a time and a place for that. Like if I'm working at a comedy club, which I haven't in years, but in my early career, I did a lot of clubs. And if you got heckled, if someone was really interrupting you, that might have been an appropriate time to zip them back with a one-liner. And I never went after anyone's, race or weight or anything like that. But if someone had had a few too many drinks, I might have used poke as a way to kind of regain the attention. But my favorite outlet for your laugh language of poke is what I call self-effacing humor. And that's not to be confused with self-defeating humor. And as leaders, I think it's really crucial. No one wants to follow a leader who is inept, but we do want to follow leaders who are approachable. And so when we take ourselves down a few pegs by telling a story, for example, I have flopped many times in my career. There was a time as an entrepreneur when I was so late on payments. I was, paying off my Visa card with my American Express card kind of thing. And so if I tell a story like that about a time that I flopped, instead of my listeners feeling like, oh, he's a loser, they actually think, oh, he's human. I can relate to that because I've gone through failures or I'm going through relationship challenges. And so it's really about, here's a fun word, authenticity, about
Mm.
finding something in your life, poking a little fun at it and being real. And this is one of my favorite of the five tactics for leaders because it's almost the opposite impact you'll think you'll have. I think as leaders, we feel this need to instantly impress with statistics or sales numbers or reports. And those things are important. But more than content, I think what our people, our colleagues, people that we're leading, they want connection before content. And so if you use poke effectively, you're actually building rapport, especially if you do self-effacing humor. Now, the flip side of that coin of poke is gently teasing other people. And a few tips on doing that is find out something that's actually lovable about them, maybe a quirk or a hobby or something. And if you know it's something they enjoy, like if someone on your team's a sports fanatic, you might have everybody surprise him or her by wearing that a particular cap, and it just delight them. And so you're kind of teasing them about this thing they're obsessed with, but you're doing it in a way that actually validates them.
Mm. Yeah. It's I think part of, as you were talking there, and particularly when you mentioned sarcasm, I think it can be such a big part of a cultural makeup of an individual. So here, as an Australian, we are known for, for being quite dry in our sense of humor, and for that almost a sarcasm to be, interwoven in conversation. And I know other cultures can find, it's hard to get it at first. It's not really inclusive in terms of that conversation storytelling. We try and be smarter, and almost outsmart. And in that attempt at outsmarting, I think we try and weave that humor in. In your experience, Adam, how much of culture, plays into it in terms of what we might prefer as our laughter language?
Such a great question. And, that naturally leads to one of the other laugh languages, which is called in jokes. And it's probably of the five my favorite. And this is so embedded in our culture. When we're listening to what makes our coworkers laugh, to our colleagues laugh, if we can play that back, a shared story about the time we all got lost looking for the restaurant, let's say, that would never be funny, in a theater setting. But around a lunch table or a conference room, that can be really funny. And so the key with in humor, in jokes, is replaying shared experiences. And sometimes those can be painful experiences. And so you always want to be sensitive to, is comedians will sometimes say too soon. So after a tragedy, it's likely too soon, right? But sometimes weeks or months or years can go by, and you can have a situation where, let's say there was some kind of malfunction at the office, some piece of machinery, which at the time was terribly frustrating, but now it's like this shared pain. So for example, in the 12-step recovery world, I mean, talk about pain, right? People are dealing with, like, let's say, alcohol addiction or other recovery issues. But that's a place where people feel free to laugh together because there's this shared sense of pain. And so they have just great stories. And my grandfather was a recovering alcoholic for 40 years. He stayed sober. And he used to say things to me about how miserable it was. And he would say, the attitude was, pour me, pour me, pour me a drink. And something that's kind of self-deprecating like that, but shared with other people who struggle with that particular issue, actually becomes a shared cultural moment for laughing together. And I think if I were to simplify all of my research, Rita, I don't think I've ever shared this, but it's this. Look for ways and be a deliberate leader who helps people laugh together. So it's that distinction from laughing at to laughing with people.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, because I go back to what you were talking about before with connection, and it is such a great way to connect people. We use laughter to break the ice, to help people feel more comfortable, particularly when it's not the poking self, or either self-deprecating or being disparaging towards others. Can everybody do it, Adam? And I ask that question from the perspective of, some people are naturally a little bit more fun and humorous than others. Even if I think about myself as a leader, in that corporate space, there was an air of real seriousness. And I think it's, when you're developing your career, we might, I often talk about it as we're trying to be probably someone that we're really not. And we end up in that land of inauthenticity. We haven't really quite found who we are, and therefore we're not really comfortable with who we are. So we take on these different identities and layers that make us feel like, we're putting on the big power jacket or whatever it might be. Does this, using humor, does it work for everybody? Or, if you're just naturally not funny, like, should you just stay in your lane? What's your advice on that?
Wonderful question. I would say it always works if you work it your way. So if you try to be super silly and that's not your personality, that'll fall flat. If you think, let's say there's an awards program coming up for your work life, and you think, I have to tell the funniest joke of all time. And so you study and you study and you study, but that's not your style. Chances are you're going to flop. Another mistake people can make with humor is, and it's scary, but when, let's say you're telling a funny story. So at the end of the story, there's a pause. The longer you can hold that pause, the bigger laugh you'll get. But the mistake we make, many of us, is we step on the punchline. So if I were to tell you a little joke, then I might immediately say, "Do you get it? Do you get it?" Or, "Hey, no one's laughing. Sorry, I guess I'm not a comedian." And the audience, and I use audience, it could be 6 people or it could be 600 people. They're actually rooting for you. We have to remember that. And so, but here's an even bigger point that I want to make to your question. You don't have to be the funniest person in the room. You can be an orchestrator of fun. So there are orchestra leaders, conductors who, I'm thinking, probably don't even know how to play a particular instrument, but what they can do is bring out the sounds of other people. So as a leader, if you find, I'll mention another of the laugh languages, wordplay. And so this is people who love clever, witty quotations and puns and dad jokes. As a leader, you can be deliberate about pulling out that kind of fun from that person. And then someone else has the laugh language of amplify. So they're a great storyteller. And so you might say, we've asked Julie to recap our conference in 5 minutes. And that's going to be funny because she's an exaggerator and a wonderful storyteller. And so I think the best leaders are very intentional about putting the spotlight on their team and highlighting their humor.
Yeah. And that's that more of that connection, as you say, obviously, comes from that. It would help people feel that sense of belonging. Here in Australia, globally, through people like Amy Edmondson, but we've been talking a lot about psychological safety in our workplaces. And I think, from what you're saying there with that connection, it's a huge part of helping people feel safe, psychologically safe, so they can be themselves. But we could also see how it could go the other way, where humor used
Yes.
in the wrong way could really be quite dangerous.
Yes. Think about it like when you're a kid, you might be on the playground and it's this wonderful protected space, but it is a space that there's a border in that playground, right? This is where the sand ends or where the grass ends. And so I think, rules don't often fit with comedy, but my three simple rules are three P's to avoid: avoid politics, avoid profanity, and avoid prejudice of any kind. So if you can build that into your culture and say, here's how we don't play together, but other things are open. Like, and sometimes it's as simple as asking a provocative question and having a little icebreaker. Like the other night, I was hosting an event with a number of people in the room, and they said, "Hey, we need to stretch for 10 minutes, and can you make it fun?" And so I simply asked this question: tell us about the first car you ever drove. Get in groups of 5 or 6, and people went and they shared with each other. And I heard people laughing in their groups. Then I took a handheld microphone and started interviewing the ones that seemed most excited. And someone said, my first car was actually, I stole my dad's tractor, and everybody's cracking up. And then someone else says, I had to sit on the phone book as a kid, even when I was 16 and got my driver's license because my legs couldn't reach. And you're hearing all these wonderful, heartfelt stories, and most of them were very funny. Some of them were just touching and loving. But the big thing was I didn't see myself as feeling the pressure to have to make them laugh, but more eliciting the humor that's already in our hearts.
Mm. Yeah, and that sense of connection, the storytelling obviously comes into it too, and just helping people connect in with a memory that hopefully brought them joy, even though it might have been maybe a little bit embarrassing at the time, but in years, later it can bring joy as we kind of remember fondly.
That's right. That's right. And so I don't know if you have this saying like we do, but in the US, there's a very popular saying where people say, I guess you had to be there.
Yeah, we have it.
And that's a big thing, is this sense of we have a special language. I'm preparing to give a presentation this week in Arizona, and this is for a university group where there will be professors and donors to the institution. And so I'm doing a deep dive on their language, their slogans, their acronyms, and I want them to know that I get them and that I celebrate them. And so I'm not going to come in with all of my pre-canned humor. I'm going to tailor it to the audience. And I talk about this in the Laughter Factor. I call it leading with laughter. And probably my favorite quotation of all time is by Mark Twain on this topic. He said, "It takes me 3 weeks to prepare a good impromptu speech."
Mm.
And so, though something might feel spontaneous and unexpected, as a leader, you're being deliberate, saying, I intend to make this a fun moment. I've blocked out 10 minutes here or the first 2 minutes of my talk. And then you tap into your way of being funny or drawing it out of other people. And so you become more of an orchestrator rather than a performer.
I love that so much because it speaks to intention, and it's almost around I'm hosting an event, or I'm curating this meeting, or I'm curating a gathering of my people, and my intention here is to help them to feel whatever. Might be help them to feel like they belong, help them to feel like we're connected, help them to feel validated, whatever it might be. When or through the research also that you've done, and when you're speaking to leaders, what's a good way to channel that intent? So before you're even coming into the space, and even if you're hosting, a large group of people, maybe as a speaker, but what's the best way to really to focus in your intent and to really think about the intention?
I love your question. So thoughtful. I think leaders are expected to cast a vision, right? Where are we going? But what many leaders don't think about is they think about where they're taking their people, but where are you taking them emotionally? Where are you taking them in terms of camaraderie? And here's one of my favorite words. How are you building the community? I don't think it's a coincidence that the word comedy and the word community have that same root of common. So if I could only hold on to one of my little secrets as a presenter, as a keynote speaker, it would probably be participation, because you cannot bore them when you involve them. So it might be playing a little game. It might be, and that's more than just saying any questions and hoping for the best. Maybe you plant a couple of fun questions. I was hosting a panel not too long ago, some very high-end tech leaders, and instead of it being a 45-minute just kind of freewheeling Q&A, which can be good, we turned it into a bit of a game show where they would reach into a bag and pull out a card. And truth is, those were already the questions that we planned to ask them. But for the audience, it felt more like, I don't know what's going to happen next. This is interesting, you know? And so I think one of the keys is assuming inattention. I think for leaders, there is another trap, which is I'm talking, so everyone needs to be listening. Well, you want to be more than a teacher that students don't like. You want to be someone who hooks them, values them. And then here's another suggestion. One of the best speech lessons I ever heard was just a few sentences. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Mm-hmm. And so humor is a great way of doing that. So you might make your solid point, then you have a fun story or illustration or way of participating. Then you recap it in such a way where your listeners own it. And so I love to have people stand, do something physical. And by the way, as we've been talking, we can see each other through the magic of digital Zooming and video. Several times you have smiled, and I kid you not, it has made me feel better. It's contagious. And so don't expect them to have a good time if you're not having a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it's that reciprocal we're talking without, like, I'm audibly not talking, but I'm engaged. And I think even as an audience member, I think there's a lovely, it's not too onerous, but a sense of responsibility about almost that encouragement for that person, particularly if the messages are resonating with you, to be demonstrating that back. And I think as leaders, we can absolutely do that when we're listening to our team and just really showing them that appreciation and that engagement, just by validating, as they are explaining or as they're contributing.
And it might be as simple. So many of my examples are in larger settings, but I've seen this work in just about any setting. Rather than waiting till you begin to speak to make that connection, what if you arrive early and shake hands and say hello and really check in on how people are doing? Then when you begin your presentation, you already feel connected. And so you don't have to just some kind of a magical trick that's going to save the day. It's more you're moving your conversation from the floor, let's say, to now it's in the spotlight. But humor it truly is this bridge, whether it's one-on-one or whether it's 1 to 1,000, or right now, whether it's through, Zoom, it does connect us. I was surprised. I knew that as I was researching this work, I knew that the medical research is stunning about how it benefits our bodies and our psychology and our well-being. But more and more studies are validating that it actually connects us like super glue. You really can't be upset with someone that you're laughing at. And so as leaders, this should influence the way we do work reviews, the way we hire, the way we let people go. And again, it doesn't have to mean that you have to be the class clown, but if you can find ways to enjoy it and share a laugh, and sometimes you may not feel like smiling, but your brain doesn't know that. So when you smile, you start to feel better, and then it becomes contagious. And so I think the best leadership is not taught, it's caught. It's contagious. Our conviction, our sense of well-being, people can feel that even beyond the words.
Yeah. And as I hear you speak, I'm thinking about, particularly as you were talking about coming into the room, a little earlier and really welcoming people and having that connection before the actual, event commences. And then I'm thinking about the leader that's, like a fly kind of buzzing around from here to here and not very mindful always about the thing that they're going into. What's your advice around helping people to really find that inspiration, to bring the laughter? And I'm going to extend that to joy, because I guess what's going on in my mind is for that really busy leader who's not really mindful about it, it's really challenging to do that. But if you've got the time and space to integrate some of that in and be really mindful about how you're coming into the space, how you're curating the space, almost, literature that you're absorbing and learning to give you some of that inspiration. What's your advice around that for that really busy leader who feels like this is another thing that I've got to do?
I think my answer goes back to the essence of your work, which is being deliberate, is planning ahead, visualizing it. And I've seen CEOs do unbelievable things. For example, like ride in on a Harley motorcycle and have a one leader had a brass band come out, and that stuff's great. It's fine. It's memorable. But it might be as simple as, let's say you have a microphone at the lectern. We call them podiums. I'm not sure what you call them, but
Yeah. Yeah.
rather than just saying, well, hey, it's great to be here and I'm glad to see Sally, that doesn't feel important. But pausing before you say anything, you'd be surprised how it draws people in. It almost makes us feel like kids again, like, hey, it's story time. And we kind of calm down and someone's leading us. And I've studied a lot of leadership and had some wonderful mentors. And one of my favorite sayings is, people are silently begging to be led. And so you don't need to apologize for it. I think you want to think in terms of reverse engineering the impact of your presentation. So do I want them to sign an initiative? How can I structure all of my presentation with humor, with content, with participation in a way where they sign that piece of paper? Or maybe it's just something I want them to believe, but don't start talking until you know what you want them to feel and what you want them to take away. When I'm booked as a keynote speaker, one of the questions I ask the meeting producer is, let's talk about the response we want people to have after I'm long gone. What do we want them talking about at the office the next day? Now, it can be more challenging as a full-time leader in one space because you don't have that impact of kind of popping in and being the guest star and then departing. But you can still bring that same approach of, what is it that I want them to feel, know, and do? And now how can I structure my opening is very important, but so is my ending. Just wrapping up a presentation by saying, well, we're out of time, or we have time for one question. That doesn't put a nice bow on it. So I know I'm getting into the weeds here, but I don't think it's a coincidence that most of the great films, whether they're comedies or action or drama, they all have this arc of, there's a story about a person who's kind of in trouble, and then they find their way out and they end up back home. I'm simplifying it, but a great joke is like that. A great speech is like that. And so I would encourage leaders to frame what you're doing in a way where it's a story that makes your audience take the journey with you, where you're not the hero of the story, you're the teller of the tale. And they're saying, I see myself in your story.
I love what you've said there about, really tapping into what you want them to feel, know, and do. I think it feels really whole that we're not leaving them kind of dangling and a bit pick your own adventure. We're really thinking carefully about, and we can't make them feel anything or know anything or do anything, quite frankly, but we can have that intention around, it's ultimate empathy. In our programs, we talk a lot about empathy mapping and really, getting into the shoes, so to speak, of that person. But through this frame of feel, know, do, it feels like ultimate empathy. We're really thinking about, different personas that might be sitting within that group of 20 or 30 or however many it is, and really connecting in with, what their needs are.
There was a great teacher in the United States who won a big award as Teacher of the Year. I know his first name is Guy. I'm blanking on his last name, but it's worth looking up. But he had this experience, this practice of before the students came in, of sitting in each of their chairs before they came to the classroom, thinking, she's experiencing this. He has this issue at home. She has concerns about this. And then when he spoke to them, he was really experiencing that empathy. And again, as leaders, there's a key distinction. Sympathy is feeling sorry for someone, but empathy is feeling with them.
Mm.
And so, what is my audience feeling? What are my employees feeling? What are my customers feeling? How can I? Sometimes we actually need to deepen or remind them of that pain so that when we get to our solution, right? So I went to the dentist today, and the good news is they identified the problem and they're going to fix it. But I wasn't thinking, hey, it'd be fun to go to the dentist today. It's because I had a particular pain, right? So think about, what is the pain that my customer, my reader, my audience, my employee has? Am I really addressing that? And then back to humor. What a great way to help the medicine go down is there's that old proverb, right? A merry heart does good like medicine. And again, science is just backing this up. We remember more. We are more inclined to take action when we feel good about the person presenting it and then how it was presented.
Mm. Yeah, it's a nice way again, and I'm coming back to that word connection. I'm curious about, where do you go to find your funny? And what I mean by that is, where do you go to become inspired? Maybe for your material that you use and share with others. But what makes, if you're really looking for that inspo, and if you got to find your funny, where do you go to find that?
Well, it sort of goes back to these laugh languages. The one we didn't cover is mine, and that's surprise. And this is the incredible impact you can have. I call it SAD. It sounds like sad, but it stands for surprise and delight. So today I received 2 or 3 texts from customers and associates, and one of them had a photo showing what I had sent them in the mail, a surprise gift. And it wasn't expensive. It was just thoughtful, funny. And so I'm always thinking, I know her, I know him. How can I surprise them? When I'm performing, I might only have 45 minutes to do it, but I do a deep dive on who's in that room. I want to know inside scoop. He's really into golf. She is a collector of coffee mugs. And then I'm going to surprise them with something that relates to their world, not my world. And I think, Rita, for me, it goes back to, as a kid, I learned how to do magic tricks. When I was 9 years old, my uncle would pull these coins out of my ear, and I was just so befuddled, and it felt so wonderful. And so I bought my first magic trick, and I couldn't believe it. I could surprise and delight other people. So I still often perform magic, and I think surprise is at the heart of almost all good humor. So good news for any of your listeners who are still listening, thinking, well, I'm just not a funny person. Well, you don't have to be if you tap into the humor tactic of surprise. Might be something you say, something you wear, something you don't do, but the human brain loves, I should say it this way, the brain loves patterns, but the heart loves breaking those patterns. That's why when someone delights us with a surprise box of candy or flowers or our favorite song, it breaks the rut and we just feel like, oh, this is wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's nice. So surprise and delight is that other one, which is great. I think it brings a smile, but it also then creates a story, which you could imagine then people, warming, hopefully in a warm way, sharing with others, but something that does, just bring joy and a smile to their face. Adam, your book, The
Rita,
Last,
I have to tell you something
yeah,
funny. Behind this curtain in my studio room here, there's like an attic, and we have toys and balls and gadgets. And so when we get to know a customer, for example, my assistant Masha and I will say, okay, I think they would love a bouncy ball. And it's crazy. This is a bouncy ball that you'd give like a 3-year-old, like a preschooler. But I don't know what it's like in other countries, but in the US, you can actually mail through the postal service. You can take a Sharpie and write a note, put the postage right on it. And so the mail carrier brings this bouncy ball, and the CEO is walking around with it, and people are laughing and they're delighted. And it cost us, I don't know, $10 or something to put a smile on everybody's face. So it's it's a sort of a boomerang, the gift of surprise, because it comes back to make you feel good too.
yeah. No, I can't see our Australian Postal Service mailing things that are not very appropriately packaged, and so we wouldn't have that. You would probably have that element of surprise once you open it, thinking, what is this? But that is pretty cool.
Yes, yes, yes.
Adam,
But so you,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I just encourage your listeners to everything you're looking for is right under your nose. You have the personality. If you're listening to this, you obviously care about leadership and being deliberate. And so, just like it takes time to learn someone's name, take the time to learn your unique laugh language and those around you, and you will be so grateful. And more importantly, they will be too.
Yeah, I love it. And I mean, obviously, so many of us would be familiar with the love languages, but bringing, that spin and your spin on it through laugh and laughter is pretty genius, actually. So I'm going to delve into those a little bit more. I know people can find more about it in your book, so by taking the quiz, but then also in the book, The Laughter Factor, the 5 humor tactics to link, lift, and lead. Adam, by way of, I guess, closing our discussion, if you had to kind of pick 2 or 3 things under link, lift, and lead for leaders in particular to think about, what would they be?
I'll tell you from my own experience. I remember one night I gave a comedy performance, and I thought I was the funniest person in the world because the audience was rolling with laughter. And I thought, wow, in comedy, we call that crushing it, or you killed it. And then the next night, I was at a different venue. I did exactly the same material, and it just fell flat. And I thought, I shouldn't even be doing this. I'm a failure. What was different? It was the same set of material. Here was the difference. The first group was packed into an intimate room. And so the laughs were bouncing off the people and off the walls. And it just felt like we're like a family, we're close. The next event had what comedians call the dance floor of death. So it had this giant dance floor in front of the stage before the first row of people. And so what I realized was the closer they get, the funnier I get. So as leaders, one of the simple things we can do is get people, sometimes it's tempting to rent a really fancy restaurant, but if people can't see each other or hear each other, that may not be conducive to the kind of fun, intimate gathering you want to have. Same with if you're doing a larger program. I will sometimes arrive at an event, I'll get there way early, and I'll encourage the meeting coordinator to bring the chairs closer to each other and closer to the speakers. Nothing else changes but the proximity. So that would be one big tip for leaders. But maybe the one I'd want to leave everybody with is the unbelievable power of listening. And so some people call themselves keynote speakers. I want to be a keynote listener. When I speak at an organization, they'll often say, "How long have you worked for us?" Because they actually think I'm on staff because I'm very deliberate about learning the language, the history, the names of the people. And so maybe my last tip would be, even sweeter than a joke is when you remember people's names. Now, if you already know their names, well, have you learned their pets' names? Have you learned the names of their kids or grandkids? We make each other feel so important when we truly feel heard. And then humor flows from that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's such a great way to, I guess, summarize that central point, I think, that I've, heard over the last 40 minutes or so in our chat, but it is that connection. And I think if we're able to link people in, and so, as you were talking about bringing people close, I think there's so much there that leaders can take away. Even not, there's a lot, most of us now are in open plan offices if we're working in an office environment or in a, whatever environment it might be. But gone are the days of that corner office where you are far away from your people and you don't really see them. It is about being close to them. And I think from that, you get to just pick up that vibe. You're certainly getting to listen, but also pick up that experience and what they're feeling.
Yes. And when you pick that up and then play it back, I think you actually get more credit as a leader because people aren't sitting around thinking, I wish Rita or Adam, I wish they were better speakers. What we're really craving is to feel listened to and understood. And I do say this several times in the book. Humor is a shortcut to trust. So I strongly encourage your listeners and followers to be deliberate. It can feel awkward. It can feel like, oh, I'm taking a risk. And sometimes you are. And so maybe the last tip, I keep saying it's the last tip, but maybe it's this one. Try some of this out when the stakes are lower. So let's say your laugh language is wordplay. You might try out a silly pun or a wacky quotation with some family members or your closest friends, so that when the stakes are higher and you're doing it in a presentation or in a boardroom, you're already more comfortable because, wow, the last 5 times I did this, everyone laughed. By the way, that's what the great comedians like the Jerry Seinfelds do. They road test the same material. And then when they are ready to try it out, when the stakes are higher, like a big television show, they're already relaxed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not new stuff that they're trying. And I heard Jimmy Fallon, I heard him he was being interviewed recently, and it was the same principle for him. He just did the same thing on repeat, and just kind of, really and intentionally watched for, and it listened for the observations, the reception from the audience until he felt that it was polished enough. But that was his first presentation, I think, at Saturday Night Live, was one that he just repeated.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Adam, it's been a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about you, but also your book. And I think, what I'm taking away from this is that even those of us that might not consider ourselves, funny, we can still bring our own version of funny to a conversation through that connection and that warmth. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, even if you don't feel funny, you can always be a fun maker. And don't forget to also be a joy receiver. It's a two-way thing. I have to remind myself of this, and I'm a comedian, is take the time as a leader to laugh yourself.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Adam. We'll pop all the details in the show notes so people know where to find your book and a link to the quiz. But thanks very much for joining us today on the
Thank
Deliver.
you so much, Rita.
Thank
I've
you.
enjoyed it.
Hey there, it's Rita, and I've just finished my conversation with Adam Christing, author of The Laughter Factor. And Adam, gosh, it was a delight to speak to him, as you can imagine. So funny, but also really, I don't want to say serious, but knowledgeable on how we can bring more laughter into the workplace. And one of the questions I had for him particularly was, well, if you're a leader and you're really not funny, don't find yourself as funny, if that's not a characteristic or a behavior that you associate with, how do you bring that funny in? And this conversation surely, gave us a lot about how we can do that in a way that is authentic. The key central point for me coming out of this conversation is connection. And so when we can help people to feel connected, we can help them just to relax and really enjoy that space, enjoy the time together. Do fantastic work, obviously, but also bring in some of that funny. So I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with Adam. And please do check out his book, The Laugh Factor, The 5 Humour Tactics to Link, Lift and Lead. And we'll provide a connection to where you can find his book down in the show notes. Have a great day.